Okay, so recording now. Brilliant stuff. Hi then, everybody. Welcome to the session today. My name is Mark Anderson. Some of you may know me from the things I do with sharing online and the schools I work with and my website and all those different things. And in those guises, I call myself the ICT evangelist. I'm a big advocate for the use of technology in the classroom and in schools to support teaching and learning and lots of different aspects of what we do in school life. During the course of the session today, I'm going to run through a presentation. I'm going to share lots of things that I've learned over the years. And I'm going to be referring to a document that I created, and I meant to put one next to me to show you during the course of the presentation, but I've got a slide with it on so I can show you later on. But I wrote a guide, a free guide to creating a digital strategy, which you can download, and a lot of what I'm sharing with you today is covered inside that document, so it's a resource for you to access for free. It's not about product per se, but about how we can best go about getting technology working at scale in our organisations. And obviously the offer from Microsoft with Microsoft 365 is a fantastic one for schools. From collaboration to communication to productivity to teaching to learning, it's all there, and it is a really super strong package. And it's a real privilege to be able to work with Q and Microsoft on this project, sharing things with you over the course of the next quite a long time. And there are loads of fantastic sessions from Holly Clark and Alice Keeler and all sorts of amazing EdTech experts from all over the world in these sessions. So I'm just going to go to my screen sharing option now. I'm going to bring up PowerPoint so I can run through my slides with you. So just bear with me for 1 second, and hopefully this will all come up swimmingly. I'm hoping that you can see my presentation okay, and fingers crossed that's all running well. It looks like it's all running well, so I'm just going to get cracking on. EdTech. Now, there are lots of things when it comes to creating the conditions for success for using technology at scale in your organisation. There are so many things to consider. It's a really difficult job. And a key thing to remember about all of this is it is contextual. Okay, so what might work in one school might not work in another, might not work in a college, and the things that are applicable in a FE college or a university might not be applicable in an early years setting. With your kindy kids and so forth and so on. So there's loads and loads to consider, but there are some key things that do sort of tend to work when it comes to using and implementing technology to support teaching and learning, regardless of the age of the students and learners that you're working with. I come to this as somebody who taught for more than 20 years. I've been involved in school leadership. I write a lot about technology and teaching and learning on my blog, and it's won a variety of awards. I've written a few books, such as The Perfect ICT Every Lesson, which is a bit of a bestseller. I've contributed to other books, such as the second big book of independent thinking, such as this one here, There Is Another Way. And there's that guide I mentioned before to creating a digital strategy, which is a free document that you can take to use to help you with your thinking around technology in your school. I'm really proud to be working here with Q and Microsoft, and as such, as you can see, I'm an MCE and MIE and all these different things. And I work with schools not just in the UK, but all over the world on these sorts of topics about teaching and learning with technology. I always think it's really important to not just base what we try to do on what we think is right. And obviously our context is important. I've stressed that a few moments ago. And say context is super important, but it's important also to take on board data and the opinions of others. And so, you know, as the OECD say here, technology can amplify great teaching, but technology cannot replace poor teaching. When I was doing a deployment of a one-to-one project in my school 10 years or so ago, you know, we were ready with all the infrastructure. The Wi-Fi was in place, the devices were in place, and everything was ready to go. But teaching and learning wasn't quite right, and so it was important that we held back. We waited 6 more months, spend time working with teachers, developing their confidence and competence, so that when we started doing things right with the technology, the conditions for success were there and ready to roll. Andreas Schleicher says lots of great things about how we can work with teaching and learning and technology. And if we're thinking about 20th century teaching practices, adding the use of technology to those sorts of practices will often actually dilute and reduce the effectiveness of your teaching. Thinking about things that we learn from cognitive science, for example, about cognitive load, retrieval practice, so forth and so on, are really important in how we develop our curricula within our schools when we're thinking about developing the use of technology. And the issue for many schools is they haven't really gotten good enough at the kind of pedagogies, and I'll talk some more about those things later on, that make the most of technology in your schools. And I love this quote from Cara Welty, because often the key issue in a school is teachers who aren't engaged enough in their ongoing professional development. If you're a person who uses social media and follow hashtags like MIExpert or the Microsoft Edu hashtag, you'll see people who are massively engaged in their own professional development, taking control of it and really pushing the boundaries and sharing what they're doing in the classroom. They're sharing things that have worked, and they're sharing the things that have gone wrong. And engaging in your professional learning in that open way is a fantastic way to engage in your professional development and in your career. And it always comes back to support the most important people that we're working with, which is the young people that we get to see and have the privilege of working with every single day. So I love this quote from Cara. So in my experience, and I work with literally hundreds and hundreds of schools internationally, what are the key things that work really well? What does a good one actually look like? Well, when I walk into a school and they want to show me all the devices they've got, often that is not the school that's going to have the things working really well. The things that happen in the schools that tend to be doing really well with technology is where they've got really strong leadership, where the school leader really knows why they're doing what they're doing it for. And that sort of vision is not just coming from them, but it's a shared vision with all of the different stakeholders in the organisation. Support staff can articulate it, teachers can articulate it, students know what they're doing and why they're doing these things. It's not just about someone leading from the front, but working together. And so when I go to these sorts of schools, everyone's really proud, the ICT evangelist is coming, and they want to show me the great things that they've done with the technology, not what technology they've actually got. Because like any good teaching and learning toolkit, it's just part of what you do every day with your teaching and their learning. And speaking of teaching and learning, that's one of the key things for focusing on. There are lots of benefits that using technology can bring. But as I'll share with you later on, Michael Fullan always says about starting with a pedagogy first approach, starting with the teaching and learning and thinking about how technology can actually impact on all of these different things. It's also really important to really build in consistent, regular, ethos-driven, culturally driven, ongoing professional learning opportunities for colleagues. I'll dig more deeply into that later on, but it's super important that teachers have the confidence and competence to be able to use what you're trying to do in the classroom. It's also important, I think, to sort of have a benchmark about where you actually come from and where you're going to, and keeping a track record of that. If you don't actually do that, then how do you even know that you've been successful? It's really key to know that. And then having a flexible learning environment is important as well. When I first started teaching, it was actually before PC Suites even, we started using Windows machines about sort of 2 or 3 years into my teaching career way back when. But bringing students to a room where they have to sit on a PC or getting themselves booked into that room, technology's moved on so well now that we can have that real anytime, anywhere access. I'm using a machine now that I can take on the bus, I can bring it in my car, I can pull over if I think of an idea, I can use automated assistants to help me with things. And bearing in mind the way that technology can work, that gives us the opportunity to do things, as Ruben Puentedura says in SAMA, to do things that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the technology. So what do I know? Well, I know that it involves a whole bunch of key things to think about, and I'll dig deeper into each of these in future slides. But it's important that we have that vision, and I mentioned that slightly before. It's important too that you engage with your community, and it's not just about teachers and students. You know, what do the shopkeepers down the road need to know if you're actually going to be giving, you know, a surface to every child in your school? How will that impact on how they work? How they impact on everything else? What do the police need to know perhaps about the technology that's being carried around by children in their school bags? There are so many things to consider, and the community isn't just the teachers, it's your governors or your trustees, depending on your school or college sort of setup. It's also really important to consider parents and how that works with them. And under lockdown, you know, what devices do you have at home? Do you want to be doing things asynchronously or synchronously? If you're going to do things synchronously, is there a digital divide in your community, which means that your learners won't even be able to access the curriculum you're trying to share through Teams or whatever it is? It's really important to consider your community. It's also important to consider the team around you, because most leaders, and I'll mention Eric Schellinger, for example, later on, who wrote Digital Leadership, a fantastic book. But most school leaders don't come from a place where they know loads and loads about technology. So how do you develop a strong team around you that can help you with the things that you don't know about? It's also important that as a school leader or a college leader or a principal, you know, you don't need to tell your colleagues that you know everything. Actually showing that you're on part of that journey with them is equally as important as leading on the projects themselves. I mentioned the compelling evidence for success a moment ago as well, and so measuring your success and where you're going to and what you're trying to achieve and where you've gone and so forth and so on is really important in order to know what things you might need to tweak or change. And it also helps with agility and being able to sort of tweak things as you're moving through your projects. CPD, continual professional development, professional learning, I say is absolutely key. Making sure the environment is right, and that can be infrastructural, things such as Wi-Fi, but it can also be the classrooms. It could be thinking about how the Wi-Fi is going to work in outdoor spaces. What does teaching and learning look like in your environment? Are you a school that has a big forest school sort of curriculum within your school? And if you do, what infrastructure needs to go around and support those sorts of things so you can do these activities outside, and how does your technology support that as well? Learning is absolutely key, as I've alluded to already, and something that people often don't think about as well. You know, that when you're starting to think about using digital, it's often based around, well, we've got this much budget available. But if you start with the budget, that's actually the wrong place to start, because what you should be thinking about is the end goal. Where is it you want to get to? And just because you might be limited by budget and you might not be able to afford it all this year, what can you actually put in place to make sure that you can actually start to move these things forward? What initiatives could you have? What fundraising efforts could you put in place? What grants are available to facilitate your project? There are loads of things that you can be thinking about and considering. But if the project isn't sustainable, then obviously it's unsustainable. So starting it isn't necessarily going to be the best thing, but knowing that you're wanting to go on that journey can be part of the plan that you come to and the strategy that you come up with in order to make these things happen. So learning, pedagogy first, that Michael Fullan thing that I mentioned before. It isn't always, when it comes to technology, about it having something to do with teaching and learning as well, because sometimes it's about efficiencies, time-saving things that you can do. You know, when I first started teaching, way back when, if I was doing a quiz with a class, you know, I'd be handing out sheets of paper. I might get the students to swap them round so they could do a bit of marking for me after the little quiz. But how much easier is it nowadays to be using things like Microsoft Forms or Kahoot, which integrates into Teams, quizzes into Teams, another quizzing tool. You know, there are lots of things. I mean, some of these quizzing tools obviously are about learning, but there are loads of things such as using dictation, which aren't necessarily going to help with teaching or learning, but they massively improve your productivity as a professional. And so I think it's always important to think about efficiencies that can be gained when it comes to using technology in the classroom as well. Here we go. This is another quote from Michael Fullan. Pedagogy being the driver, technology is the accelerator. When you start to think about how you can use technology, again, just those savings you can make just on a simple level with the quizzing example I gave a moment ago is a massive driver for change. using your tablet, your Surface, for example, as a visualizer, using Office Lens to snap some work and then live annotate it with your pencil, like a visualizer. These are great ways of bringing learners together and can be a real clear part of your everyday teaching and learning toolkit in your classroom. But it's not about the technology, although obviously it's a bit about the technology because you have to have it and it has to work and all those things. But it's about the starting point being we want to move teaching and learning forwards. There are loads of strategies you can think about when it comes to teaching and learning with technology. It could be that you want to talk about blooms and moving things towards those higher order thinking skills, and technology again can massively support you through all those different stages. It could be around Vygotsky's zones of proximal development, moving things into not just externally motivating ways, but into shared ways, using the collaborative tools, working on a Word doc online, or responding to learners' videos on Flipgrid. Bearing in mind, Dale himself said that his codes of experience weren't actually anything to think about, but it still gives us a compelling thing to think about when learners get far more engaged with authentic activities where they're doing things rather than just being asked to imagine them. And I mentioned this final one here before, Puentedura's SAMA model, where the top two levels, redefinition and modification, they link really closely to this idea of authenticity with Dale, where we're thinking about using technology to do things that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the technology. Yesterday I ran a session about using Paint 3D and Microsoft PowerPoint, and we were able to sort of think about how we could actually create a 3D model of Nemo, paint it, create a virtual 3D model of Nemo, and then put Nemo into a three-dimensional world with inside PowerPoint as a storytelling tool. How authentic is that? How engaging is that? Students can work on these things together. They're being super creative whilst applying their knowledge and understanding and the remembering of the story from Finding Nemo. They're using technology to do things which wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the technology. And so having all these things in mind when it comes to what we're doing with our schools and our teachers and our learners and moving our curriculum forwards, there's loads and loads to think about what your curriculum looks like. And under this new normal, when schools are engaging with learning in ways which they didn't think they'd have been doing 6 months ago, with these kind of things to think about, how can we actually tweak and change our strategy to make things even better for our learners and for our teachers and ultimately our whole communities. A framework that I use when it comes to thinking about teaching and learning with technology it is a thing called TPAC, and I'll talk about that more in just a second, but it derives from this idea of combining our pedagogical knowledge and our content knowledge. Schulman in '87 said that good teaching and learning was when we combined our pedagogical knowledge, i.e. what we've learned in our post-grad studies, and compared to what we learned in our sort of pre-grad studies in our degrees. So we're combining our content knowledge, what we know about our subjects, and our pedagogical knowledge about what we know about teaching and learning. And good teaching and learning is somewhere there in the middle, in that Venn diagram there. A few years later, Kohler and Mishra developed this into what they called their TPAC model, and that brings in technological knowledge. But again, teachers, they'll spend a lot of time learning about their subjects, they'll spend a long time learning about pedagogy when they're trained to be a teacher. But how many teachers actually involve themselves in professional learning around how to successfully embed technology into their teaching and learning practice? Not many. Now, it has come on massively in recent years, but it's still an area that needs significant development and tweaking and changing and making better. So as a school leader, as someone leading on digital in your school, what can you do to help teachers move that technological knowledge on? And it's not just about knowing that you need to press Control and P, or the print button to print, or you need to save it to a PDF, or how to actually annotate your screen with your stylus. It's not about knowing, but also more importantly, know about when it's right to or not to use those technologies. Sometimes not using technology at all is the best thing to do. Sometimes it can be because using the technology and preparing a lesson where you're going to use technology is actually going to take longer than the lesson itself would take. We need to be mindful of teachers' work-life balance and their well-being. It's great that we can do these things with technology, but a healthy dose of so what is important to consider. And if we're going to think about the so what, move it forwards. So we can do this. Yeah, we can do this. So what? Well, let's so that. And so have that conversation. I'm doing this so that I'm able to X, I'm able to Y, I'm able to, be creative, I'm able to provide opportunities for peer assessment so that I can do this, that, and the other. Changing the so what to the so that is a great way of thinking and applying your technological knowledge to what you're doing with your pedagogy and the content coverage you have to go through. There's lots to think about around TPAC. This is an infographic I made a few years ago, and you can download this if you just go to my website, ictevangelist.com. There's a downloadable version of this, which digs deeper into the TPAC model and what all the different elements look like and how it can work together and so forth and so on. But my absolute favourite thing about TPAC is this idea that it's truly meaningful, deeply skilled teaching with or without technology, because sometimes that's the best choice. What we need to better try and do with the support we give to our colleagues and our teachers is to enable them to make those professional judgments rather than choosing to not use technology just because they're scared or the infrastructure isn't in place, so forth and so on. I try and break things down into sort of 3 simple rules when it comes to using technology as a teacher in the classroom. And I've made the IT bit capitalized because it's information technology, but the things sort of ring true. Keep it simple, keep what you're trying to do simple, keep it real and relevant, and make your choices absolutely count. So remember, for most people, they're not a computer programmer. This isn't everything that's been they were trained to do massively, but find things that work for you in your context and are relatively easy to do and can impact on learning. And having that consistent in your organisation as well. Consistency of approach is really helpful for our learners, particularly when we think about the cognitive science behind things like cognitive load. And don't just use technology for the sake of it. Often I see teachers using some amazing technology, but it's more about the wow than the actual why and how. So keeping it focused on that pedagogy first approach that I mentioned before is also really important. So to make your use of technology count, use it for a purpose, to enhance learning, to support learning, or to support your teaching, make your life easier with tweaks and changes for productivity. I see fantastic examples of teachers leaving awesome feedback, and we know from again research that strong feedback is one of the biggest influences and impacts on student progress. So rather than sort of handwriting, and it's great that you can annotate things, and it's also important to do that sometimes. But why not screen record it, for example, whilst you're annotating and using your voice, or even just use your voice to leave an audio bit of feedback? How much more impactful is feedback in 1 minute that you've used your voice to leave that feedback compared to feedback that you spend 1 minute actually writing? You can say so much more. It's more engaging, it's more authentic, it's relevant. Students can hear your voice while you're speaking and can hear your intonation. Things are often lost with text. Students with accessibility issues struggle sometimes to read their teacher's handwriting. There are really compelling reasons for doing things with your voice, just as one of many, many examples. But why not choose to do that when it makes it so much easier for you to do that and so much more accessible and relevant for your learners? So when we started doing projects in my school sort of 10 years or more or so ago, I'd seen a fantastic change management image by Noster, and it's linked down at the bottom there, Noster T, in a conference, and I tweaked it a bit based on the things that we were learning about and trying to strategize and get things working in our school. And I found it really helpful because these are the points I've mentioned before. It's about having the vision, the skills, the incentives, the resources, and an action plan to make those things work. And so if you've got these things in place for your staff when it comes to having your strategy around using digital for teaching and learning, then you're likely to have success. But if you leave some of these things out, so let's say, for example, you miss out your action plan, then you get false starts. People don't know when things are supposed to be happening. Oh, we're trying to do audio feedback this week. Oh, I thought it was next week. And it sort of staggers things and doesn't make things work as well as you want them to. If you haven't got the resources in place, and that could be your Wi-Fi, it could be access to the technology, it could be all sorts of things, but if the resources aren't in place, then your stakeholders and the people you're working with are going to be frustrated, and they're not going to be able to do and engage with the project as you would wish. And what are the incentives? Because if there aren't incentives, it doesn't mean to say you have to be giving free chocolate or croissants or coffee or Amazon vouchers or anything to get people incentivized. Actually, often one of the greatest drivers for these projects are the learners themselves. And I'll talk about involving and engagement with your student body in a few minutes. But it's really important to have these things in place. And then, you'll have your intrinsic motivators, your extrinsic motivators. What are those things that you're going to use to help you? And then we mentioned CPD many times, but if you haven't got the CPD in place, if people don't have the skills to make it work, then obviously they're going to feel anxious. And then finally, if you haven't got a vision, then what on earth is happening at all? So these are key elements to think about in working your way forward. And these were the guiding principles that we started using at the start of our project to help us get what we wanted out of the project to involve all the various stakeholders. Now this has been revised from the experiences we had sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 years later in my school, and I've got a revised version to share with you later on, but that was where we started. So the vision, what do you actually want to achieve? Develop and articulate those things with your stakeholders. Work with your community, and bear in mind that it's not just your teachers and your students. Who are those people in your community, and what should a good one look like? Learn from others. Ask questions on Twitter, for example. Get and look at the Microsoft Showcase schools. How have they managed to make these things work for them in their context? Can you take anything and apply it to your context? And again, engaging with all those stakeholders, from children to teachers to parents to support staff, involve everybody. It's not about taking on board and doing everything that everybody says, but being mindful of what people are trying to achieve, wanting to achieve, and then how you as a leadership team can facilitate those things actually taking place. We mentioned sustainability. Can you afford to do it? One of the things that we found was we couldn't afford to, with all our devices, to pay for everybody to have a device. So we asked teachers if they'd be willing to contribute to a device. But obviously the school contributed too. It was a partnership moving forward, and teachers at the end of the scheme that we had were able to actually keep the devices for themselves. The environment is important. Environment is lots of things. It's physical, it's the classrooms you're in, it's also emotional. Getting your environment right is absolutely essential, from Wi-Fi to the classrooms to everything. We've mentioned the importance of CPD, but it really is important. And it's not just about getting people like me in to do a training session each and every day. You'll have amazing practice in your school or your college. Why not use some of that amazing practice? Because it's real, it's relevant. And actually, not just the teachers, the students can do this as well. I'll mention student digital leaders later, but they're so integral, I think, to making these sorts of strategies work and helping learning to really happen. Teachers get into the business of teaching to make a difference. And if you can engage your young people in training, and these are things that I run in schools with students as young as sort of 6 years old, right through to 18 years old. Involve your various stakeholders in it. It's important to get people into support, from strategy to running sessions and days like I can, but it's equally important to involve the people that you're working with as well, that are doing great things, and that provides loads of authenticity in the project that you're trying to undertake as well. I'd say teachers do lack the time and confidence to use their technology often as well. So what can you do to support all of those different things? Because lots of your teachers will be at the survival phase at the bottom here. How can you move them through to a point in time where they've got mastery of the technology, they can have some real impact in the classroom, and then can really start to innovate these things? Apologies for, I need to be one mistake somewhere. Apologies for the 2 lines on that one there. That was something I shared many years ago, actually, and Sylvia Duckworth, who many of you will know, turned that into this lovely little sketch note. And what are each of these different things? I mean, well, these are sort of things that I'm sure lots of your colleagues and teachers can articulate. If you're a survival, there are people who are saying, oh, I'm scared of breaking it, I don't know what to do. I want to use it in lessons, I've been told to use it in lessons, but I'm not sure how do I do it? So how can you scaffold and support these people? Because not only will you have people at the survival phase in your organisation, even before you start a project, you'll have people who've already got an idea of how to use it. They've already been trying it on the quiet, on the down low with some of their classes, and they'll already be pretty confident. And you'll have some others who are feeling really confident, and now they've been using technology, albeit not part of a whole school strategy, but they've been using it for a long time. You know, I would class myself as being somebody up here for in my school for a long time, but it was me in isolation. How can we get all of your teachers, all of your teaching staff, to a point where everyone is being impactful, and hopefully many of them innovating with the things that they're doing in consistent ways with all of your learners? Again, all these things that we're seeing here, these little sketch notes and things, are all available on my website, ictevangelist.com, these sorts of things are all over social media. In fact, you can find this with a simple search using a search engine. So I mentioned student digital leaders. This was something that I came across many years ago, and I started it as an initiative in my school. And following on from that, a friend of mine who's deputy head teacher in the east of England, we started the UK National Digital Leaders Network. But what does it look like? Well, it's where children, and you'll already have student digital leaders in your school, even if you haven't got a group of them that you've actually sort of assigned that label, given them a little badge to wear, all these things. You know, students often help their teachers in class when teachers get stuck, but by giving it a bit of authenticity and giving it a label, and facilitating it happening and being really clear about these things, actually, again, it's that cultural thing, shifting the change and creating that ethos around how you can get digital working at scale in your organisation. We had children as student digital leaders in our school, and say my job was to lead as a sort of director of digital technology in the school on the projects to do with teaching and learning with technology. But it wasn't me who surveyed the staff and asked them what they wanted some training and support on. The students did that. They sent out a form and the teachers filled it in, and the students then grouped those teachers together into similar things. So some wanted some help with spreadsheets, some wanted some help with word processing, some were confident in using mail merge, so forth and so on. And they grouped these different people together, and then they organised little micro training sessions for those different individuals. You know, it was immense. It was massive. They did so much more work than I could do by myself. It was really authentic for them. It was a scheme that attracted students who don't often get involved in a variety of school clubs. It wasn't often, although we did, but again, being a bit generalistic. But you know, those students who were on lots of sporting teams weren't many, and most of them weren't the students who went for student digital leaders. It gives students who have alternative interests an opportunity to really engage and share in school life and to have an impact. So student digital leaders was huge, and it really raises their aspirations. We had students wanting to learn how to develop apps. I had a student who developed our first school app and became one of the youngest app developers in the world, and at the time was the youngest app developer in Europe. It really increases their opportunities as well, from oracy to creating screencasts to helping others to improving and increasing their confidence. And again, these are the sorts of students who don't often want to engage in school life and some of the things that take place, from school musicals to all sorts. And it also helps to bring previously tech skeptical colleagues on board. Here's a school, it took place at one school. You can see a picture of me there at the back. But we had, across the course of 2 days, 20 different schools come together. And all these young people you can see here became these student digital leaders who then went away and worked with their teachers in their school to help bring forward teaching and learning with technology. So involve people and provide support for that CPD. And then the measurement, again, is really, really important, because if you don't do that, how do you even know whether you've been successful at all? It's really, really key that you actually go through those processes and make sure that you know you've actually been successful. So how our strategy develops, that's probably the slowest animation I've ever put in my entire life, so I'm not quite sure why that one's gone so slow, but thank goodness it's finished now. So how did our strategy develop? Well, I showed you that change management process thing before. It moved forward. We learned more about what worked from that. So I mentioned vision. That's still there. It's really important. It's still important to engage your community. It's still important to have your team around you. Sustainability, really important. The environment is there. CPD, the measurements, and the learning. And that's a much more detailed and in-depth part of all the things we need to be thinking about. Now, bear in mind, there are other things to think about, okay? And yes, that would lead to ongoing success, but this is talking purely about teaching and learning with technology. There are other things to consider: safeguarding, data protection, impact assessments. That's what we have here in the UK, and GDPR and so forth and so on. You'll have similar things if you're in Atlanta, let's say, but it's incumbent upon us as schools to think about all of these things. Okay, but when it comes to leading on these things as with a teaching and learning hat on, this is what we're trying to think about. And like we saw before on the previous image, if we forget the learning, then we fail, full stop. If we don't actually measure what we're doing, then we don't even know if we've been successful. If there's no CPD, no training, no professional learning, then there's anxiety. If we don't think about the environment, then there's frustration. If it's not sustainable, then it's unsustainable. If you don't have a good team around you, and the team who are around you know what's happening, then there's confusion. If you don't involve the community, there's resistance. And if you don't think about your vision, well, yeah. And just think, this is what happens, okay, if just one of these things isn't considered within your strategy. Imagine if you don't think about a few of them. Well, not only, let's say you forget CPD, measurement and learning. Not only is it not going to work because you're not thinking about teaching and learning, you don't know if you've been successful, and your staff are stressed out and anxious, and that's just 3 of them. So it's really key to be thinking about all these different areas. So how do we solve that problem? Well, as Eric says, it's not about flashy tools. It's being strategic in your mindset, using the resources you've got to improve what you do, and thinking about what you might need to do, but focusing, having a laser focus on what you're trying to achieve. And he talks about it being engagement and achievements. And that's a quote from his book, Digital Leadership, Eric Scheninger, a great guy to follow on Twitter. He shares loads of great posts and things as well. This is from something that I wrote. This is in the Times Educational Supplement. But again, I alluded to this before. Head teachers can't be expected to be experts in technology, but they will use its power to help them to make things better for the children. They'll step outside their comfort zone, all those things. And that's where a true digital leader lies. It's not about being the best user of technology. It's about facilitating those things and allowing those things to take place and creating the conditions for success for those things to take place within inside your school. Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and it's part of our role in leadership when it comes to thinking about technology, about actually unpicking that and making it less sort of cloak and mirrors and shadows and mirrors and all these sort of things, and making it so we can facilitate all of these things working really, really well within inside our organisations. And so for me, this is kind of our sort of recipe for success. It's about creating that teaching and learning culture, providing our students with their essential skill sets, and equally is true for our teachers. The reason why I put this one in is I mentioned research and things earlier on, and as you probably know, metacognition and self-regulation are one of the things that our learners can have that has the biggest impact on student progress and achievements. And just allowing our learners to know, for example, how to successfully, and even more important now, with many of us being under lockdown and students being left to their own devices to sort of manage their home learning, obviously supported by their parents. But again, using the tools that are available to us, our Outlook calendars, setting reminders, being mindful to use things like Do Not Disturb. I've got my Do Not Disturb on my phone now, so I can completely focus on what I'm doing here. And all these things help us to be far better at our jobs of teaching and their job of learning. So it looks like we're going for another super slow animation here now, so I'll just get that through. Just to reinforce it, to finish off, and then think carefully about our vision, community, team, make it sustainable. Our environment's really important. Loads of CPD, left, right, centre, not just in isolation. Have it, as something in your. You'll have a meeting cycle for department meetings, for example. So why not have a standard item about how you're using the technology linked to your project? These are all the things which are really important in order for you to make all of this work. And remember, if you miss any of them out, or if you miss more than one of these things out, you're unlikely to be as successful as you otherwise could be. I mentioned before, if you want some more help, this is a free guide which delves into this in much more detail. There's more in here about trustees and governors and finance and sort of safeguarding and special educational needs and data privacy and how you work with your network manager. But the things we cover today really in here within your sort of senior leadership stuff and your training and CPD and your teaching and learning stuff. And teachers and students, as you can see there, should be right at the very heart of what it is that you do. You can download that for free at netsupportsoftware.com/digital strategy. It's also on my website, ictevangelist.com, and you can get that on the digital strategy page. When you go to the site, you'll see it says digital strategy at the top, and there's a link on that page where you can download that for free. No need to put your email address in or anything like that. So I hope you found that useful. I don't do drive-by sessions as well, so if you've liked anything in here and want to share it more widely as well, please do. I'll come back and give you the chance to ask me some questions and things in a minute. I'll be able to check your sort of chat inside Teams in just a second. But if you want to ask any questions or share any thoughts about the session today, please do tweet me at ICTEvangelist. My website's ictevangelist.com. Obviously, there's plenty more resources available from Q. If you go to q.org/Microsoft, all the other sessions are all listed up there. For more information on the sessions as well, you can search on Twitter on the hashtag GETA, which stands for the Global EdTech Academy. And I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to join me for this session today. And I'll jump in now back into Teams to see if you've got any questions and things. But I really do hope. I think that's kind of you. Cheers. I really do hope that you found the session useful today. Thank you ever so much for joining me. Okay. Thank you. I hope you found it that useful. Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Cheryl.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hi. Is that Dennis?
Yeah.
Hiya.
I was just wanting to know how you go about measuring.
Yeah, well, there's lots of ways of doing the measurement stuff. I mean, one of the things that we did before we went live as well was to actually do some actual control trials where we had sort of comparative classes to see the sorts of impacts we were likely to see over time. And the thing is to remember with this sort of stuff, and you can do time series analysis, you can do cost benefit analyses, there's all sorts of different ways in which you can measure all these different things. But the key thing to be, lots of schools spend a lot of time, you know, obviously results in exams are a really important part of school curricula, and we work to our students towards their exams all the time. And that's really quantitative data, isn't it? And it's really easy to know, you know, their target grades are X, they've got Y, were we successful? If they got their target grade or better, then yes, we were successful. What's important to remember with technology is sometimes actually, though, the improvements are qualitative. It could be that you've improved the access to the resources. It could be that you've sort of reduced the amount of time things are take to actually take place. There are also loads of side benefits as well. So, for example, if you're starting to use things such as OneNote Class Notebook or OneNote Staff Notebook, which is a fantastic add-on many people don't even know about, but using OneNote Staff Notebook within your department teams, for example, can hugely reduce admin, saving on printing. You know, you get printing savings inside. From using sort of your sharing of PDFs and things within OneNote, again, for example, or doing things digitally in Teams. What's really important to try and do, Bennett, is before you actually start on a project, is put down what your success markers actually are. So whatever you've articulated, the things that you're going to try to see whether, you know, some things you're trying to achieve with your project. So it could be, you know, student results or student engagement. And what's great about the tools you have available to you as well is so easy to poll students, okay, and parents and all your various stakeholders using things like Polly, which is a great add-on that you can run within Teams, or just using simple Microsoft Forms to share them with your various stakeholders. That's another way you can sort of benchmark some of the success things. It's about getting those criteria down at the start, so you've got a level playing field about knowing where you've actually come from compared to where you've actually got to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm joining a school which is quite academically successful. It's an independent girls' school.
Yeah, congratulations.
And yes, I'm going there to do digital strategy. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I don't know if that's me or my connection.
Sorry about that.
No, I think it might be me. So I'm just a little bit wary of going in and with their focus academic excellence, say, at the moment. We come in with technology. I think there's going to be a resistance because they're already doing things well. So I don't know if you've ever come across situations like that where
many times been it, both in role and as a consultant. I say it's a very difficult one. I went to an independent school near London, and I was presented meetings with lots of different stakeholders, and there was a teacher there who was in their 50s, head of department. I've had, and this is say quite a few years ago now when I use the reference, I've had GCSE results of straight A stars with all of my classes for the past 12 years. Why do I need to use technology? Was the question that was put to me. And the advice I would give you in those sorts of circumstances, Binit, is, refer it back to what the school's vision and values are, not what you're trying to achieve or what things you might have done in the past, because you're trying to embed and ingrain yourself in a culture within a school that's existed probably for a very long time. And, obviously you can sit there and talk about the qualitative benefits and the quantitative benefits, but if there's no real perceived benefit in terms of them being able to do that, another great win with teachers are always like, what's in it for me? Okay, so also think back to, put some questions back to those people and say, where are your pressure points? Where do you find yourself most stretched with the work that you have to do? And then you can provide examples of the ways in which technology can help. But it is a hearts and minds thing, and it does take you a very long time. And with the work I do when I'm consulting, it's really difficult because I've often got to go into a school and they don't know me at all. There's often resistance against me. It's hard doing it on going in for 2 days. The thing with being someone who's going to school where you're going to be imposed in it is my advice to you there is to just keep the charm offensive up, and it's not just about doing things in piecemeal. So start creating your teaching and learning newsletter, and don't call it your EdTech newsletter. Call it your teaching and learning newsletter and put one of those out every half term, and don't just write it yourself. Find those pockets of excellence, and get those teachers who are doing things already really, really well, so that you can share their stories, because they'll have been imposed longer than you, and they will have far more authenticity in their voice than your voice. And by doing that as well, you're bringing people with you on that journey. But it's not just that, it's the student voice, it's getting involved with the parents, it's speaking to the governing body or the trustees, depending on the school ownership model and all those things. It's every part and piece of it. It's not just one thing you do in isolation, it's those little things. And the best way to think about it, I think, the marginal gains approach that Brailsford did with the Olympics back along, where they looked at all, we did really well in the Olympics with the Team GB, with the cycling, but it wasn't that they bought these super bikes and we were just like the 300, and it was where they did a micro analysis of all the little things and improved and tweaked every little thing, and then when you aggregate all those different improvements, you then saw the big improvements because you aggregate all those little things. Go in and think about all the little things and tweaks and things you can do as part of your strategy around that framework I've given you today, and then just keep on and plow away at it, and say, you won't see much impact in a year, you won't see much, it'll take you a good sort of 3 years. It depends on where the school's at in its journey. I'd hate to get into your position of going to a school that's already like a Microsoft Showcase school. I mean, how do you move that forward from that starting point? Do you know what I mean? But again, it's about finding out where you're at and all those things, isn't it? Sorry, say that bit again, Binit.
I said, luckily, I'm definitely not going into that. So it's definitely going to be a kind of ground up project, which I think will be quite fun.
That'd be fantastic. Well, again, I don't ever do drive-by sessions. Obviously, I've shared a lot of advice and things on here, but if you want to get in touch in the future, I'm very easily found on Twitter and through my website, and I'm always happy to follow up and help people out, either on a quick chat basis like this, or on an engagement basis as well. Although I'm not selling my services here today. I'm here to support you in any way that I can. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's all right, my pleasure, Binit. And anyone else got any other questions for the session today around anything?
I've got one, a bit similar. I spoke to you via email the other day.
It's Dan. Hi, Dan.
Hiya.
You made it.
I'm at a group of 4 independent schools.
Yeah.
And I've been put in this role, and it's over the years they've created quite hodgepodge in terms of their software ecosystem. They're all over the place. So there's Google Classroom, Seesaw, Zoom, Teams.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the thing that's the most embedded, because they've also got different devices, the thing that's the most embedded is Firefly. Yeah,
Right.
that's the thing that doesn't seem to integrate very well with the new stuff. Like we've introduced Teams and it's gone down really well, but we're telling them to do assignments on Firefly, and they don't talk to each other, so it's creating more workload for staff if they want to use Teams. I just didn't know if you had any thought on how important the actual choice of ecosystem is, because we can't stay like we are. It's got to be, in my opinion, one. We've got to pick a camp and run with it, but that's what I'm thinking. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's what's most important. There are other things to consider, around costs, because without mentioning any product names, some of those that you have mentioned are exceedingly expensive, and I would bring it down to a few terms really. One, okay, and I would start with this. Start with the students, okay, because students have, and every school is academic, whether it's independent or state, okay, even if it's a PRU or a high performing grammar school, everyone wants our children to do well. Okay, so I'd start with the children, and consistency of experience. They've got enough to remember with their academics without having to remember how to submit work for feedback, how to create this or do that or do the other. So that'd be my starting point. My next one would be to focus on staff and their workload and their abilities to be able to do all the things that they need to do as well. Because if they've got to be working a whole ton of different systems, or if systems aren't speaking to each other, then again, that's a whole nightmare to manage and a whole nightmare to actually work with within your classroom. The next thing to consider as well then is about the consistency of approach. Okay, and working out what's best. Now, you'll know what you want, and certainly you've already clearly got some voice from your colleagues about how great Teams has been. It's not working well. You've already got some compelling evidence for the change. But before you sort of go, I would do some serious staff surveying. You've been on lockdown, so contact parents and find out what their sort of thoughts are around all these different things. I'm pretty confident of what the answer will be, but in order to actually get buy-in from your stakeholders, you need to actually involve them in the process. So whilst in your head you might be like, I know we need to stick with Teams and be using Microsoft all the time and all this sort of stuff, it's really important that you bring those other stakeholders with you on that journey, because if you don't involve them on the journey, then you'll get resistance, and you don't want that. And don't be afraid. There may well be pockets. There may be 2 or 3 people who are really welded into using one of those particular things you've mentioned. But unfortunately, for those very few people, what's important, most important, is why I said start with this. Get the student feedback, get the teacher feedback, and go with what works best for everybody. And what tends to happen is a consistent approach that's quick, easy, simple. And I always use that KISS acronym. That keep it simple, silly. Yeah. Because honestly, teachers' lives, students' lives, we're too flipping busy to be having to click 1,000 times to do something, or it doesn't work, and you want buy-in. You want people to actually be making a win with the tech, not having to be, how can you move from, so if staff are struggling to integrate what they're trying to do, they're stuck at survival all the time, aren't they? When can they get to the point where they can impact and innovate? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Because like when I joined the school, I think I had about 7 usernames and passwords at the start, because nothing is the same, which makes it a nightmare for staff. So I think sorting out all that is going to be my first port of call. Cool.
I've got a similar question, I think, linked to what you're doing here as well from Binnett, because he said, Darren reminded me of a very specific thing, what your views on assignments in Teams. You can do assignments in Teams. I'm not going to give you an opinion because it's not my place to do that in this session. But what I will do is say, you can do that in Teams. You can do it in OneNote, Class Notebook, whatever you choose to do, Binnett, and same for you, Dan. I would say go back to that keep it simple approach, keep it simple, silly. Make whatever you do as transparent and as easy as possible for all your stakeholders, okay, to give as much feedback and what have you as possible. I think that the opportunity, and there's a guy who's been doing some great sharing, and he's a guy I do a show with on YouTube on a Monday night, Ollie Lewis. He's a head of science and an assessment head at a school in Abu Dhabi, and he's been sharing some fantastic feedback models using OneNote class notebook. So he's got the annotations. He's a physics teacher. He's got the annotations. He's got the verbal feedback. He's setting the assignments in Teams and then doing the feedback in OneNote. That's his workflow. But again, you know, when in a project I've been involved with, both in post and outside, I always urge schools to go and see what other schools are doing really, really well. Microsoft, on their website, I've got a list of all the awesome Microsoft Showcase schools. I'm guessing both of you are UK based, right? So yeah. Find out what the great schools are, get in touch with them, and it's part of their remit to actually do some sharing and show you what they're doing. And it's not about going there and taking what they do and just trying to transplant it back in your school, because you can't do that, because it's got to be contextual. But my advice to you would be, go and have a look at what else is out there. Find some really good examples of what a good one looks like, and use that to inform what you do and bring back into your strategy. And the strategy that you devise and come up with, remember, mustn't be something that you just sit there and write and go, right, guys, we're doing this. Again, you need to be sharing all these things in your question for both of you as well. I mean, you might not be able to answer this, Bennett, because you're not in post yet. But you know, have you got like a digital champions team? Have you got a strategy team that you work with across your different schools or within your school to actually, you know, discuss all these things as part of your key close knit team, all these different people? So yeah, lots and lots to think about, but hopefully, you know, keeping it simple, consistency of approach, find out what works elsewhere, think about how you can apply it in your own context. All that stuff can really, really help. And obviously, if I can help some more, drop me a line, because I'm always happy to help.
That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much. I've got to go because I've got a lesson starting in 1 minute.
That's all right, Dan. No worries. Thank you to
Thank you.
Thank you to Binny. Thanks to everyone else who's come along. I need to hang up as well, because otherwise the recording's going to go over. So thank you all so much. Please do get in touch if you need some more support. Check out more on offer from the Global EdTech Academy. And thanks again for joining this session, and especially the visitors from overseas. Say it's very, very early where you are, so thanks for staying up to join for this session. Thank you ever so much. I'm going to hang up and I'm going to end the recording in about 3 seconds. Thank you ever so much. Cheers.